At 68 years old, he sat across a small kitchen table from his daughter, watching her cry in a way he had not seen since her own divorce nearly a decade earlier, as he explained that he intended to sell the home she had grown up in and relocate permanently to a country she had never visited, to marry a woman she had met exactly once, over a video call that had lasted less than an hour. He remembers thinking, in that specific moment, that he understood completely why she was frightened, and that understanding her fear did not change what he had already decided to do. This is his story, and he wanted to begin with that difficult kitchen table conversation rather than the easier parts, because he felt most stories like his skip directly to the romance and avoid the genuine cost that decision carried for the people who loved him. He had been widowed at 63, after 36 years of marriage, and had spent the following 4 years in a small town outside Nashville, building what he described as a functional but genuinely diminished version of a life, adequate by most external measures, quietly hollow in ways he had not fully articulated even to himself until considerably later. He had 2 adult children, both local, both attentive in the specific way adult children often are toward a widowed parent, regular calls, holiday gatherings, a general watchfulness that he appreciated genuinely, while also recognizing, with some private discomfort, as its own kind of gentle constraint on the shape his remaining years might otherwise take. He met her through what he described as an almost accidental introduction, a mutual acquaintance from an online community focused on classic automobile restoration, a hobby he had maintained since his 20s, who mentioned, in passing during an unrelated conversation, a cousin in the Philippines who shared the same interest and might enjoy corresponding with him about it. Their initial exchanges, spanning several months, focused almost entirely on cars, a specific and somewhat unusual foundation for what eventually became something considerably more significant. He was careful to note this detail deliberately, because he felt it distinguished his experience from a narrative he had encountered frequently in online commentary, one that assumed relationships between older American men and Filipina women necessarily began with an explicitly romantic or transactional framing from the outset. His own experience, he said, had genuinely not, and the eventual shift toward something romantic had emerged gradually, over nearly a year of correspondence that had initially been about carburetors and restoration techniques, rather than anything resembling courtship. She was 44, considerably younger than him, a detail he addressed directly and without evasion, because he said he understood it was frequently the first and sometimes only detail that outside observers fixated on when learning about his situation. She had never married, had built a stable career as a regional sales manager for an agricultural equipment distributor, and had, by her own account during their eventual conversations about it, specific and well-considered reasons for her interest in him that had nothing to do with the assumptions he suspected many people made automatically. She had watched 2 close friends enter marriages with considerably younger local men that had, in her observation, ended in financial and emotional difficulty, and had developed, well before meeting him, a specific preference for a partner with established life experience, financial stability achieved through his own decades of work, rather than inherited or windfall wealth, and what she described to him directly as a demonstrated capacity for the kind of sustained commitment his 36-year first marriage represented. Before we get into what happened after that difficult kitchen table conversation, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell. Every week on this channel, we share real, honest stories of Americans starting over overseas, not the polished version, the honest one. Subscribe now so you never miss one. He wanted to address the financial structure of the decision with genuine specificity, because he felt vagueness on this particular topic was precisely what fueled the skepticism his children, and later a considerable number of online commenters, directed at his choice. He had, before ever proposing marriage, consulted an estate attorney regarding a prenuptial agreement, one that clearly separated his existing assets, including his retirement accounts and the eventual proceeds from his Nashville home sale, designating them specifically for his 2 children's eventual inheritance, while establishing separate and considerably more modest terms for shared household expenses going forward. He raised this topic with her directly during an in-person visit roughly 8 months into their relationship, a conversation he had genuinely dreaded, anticipating either offense or, worse, confirmation of the exact transactional dynamic he hoped was not present. Her response, he said, was immediate and visible relief, along with the specific observation that she had been quietly concerned about how to raise the identical topic herself without appearing to suggest she doubted his intentions, and had similarly consulted with a Philippine attorney regarding her own modest but genuine assets, a small piece of inherited family land she wanted protected and designated for her own eventual nieces and nephews, rather than absorbed into a shared marital estate. The decision to relocate to the Philippines, rather than bring her to Tennessee, was, he wanted to clarify, discussed at genuine length rather than simply assumed. She had, in fact, held a valid opportunity for a work visa sponsorship through a potential position with an American agricultural firm, an option they seriously investigated for several months before ultimately deciding against it. The deciding factor, in his account, was less about either location's inherent merits and more about a specific calculation regarding his own remaining years and how he wanted to spend them. His children, while emotionally significant to him, were established, financially independent, and did not require his ongoing physical presence in any practical sense. Her family, by contrast, included aging parents she remained the primary local support for, a structural reality that made her relocating away from them a considerably heavier practical burden than his own relocation away from 2 independent adult children in their 40s. The kitchen table conversation with his daughter, the one he had opened this story with, did not resolve quickly or cleanly, and he wanted to be honest that their relationship remained genuinely strained for nearly a year following his eventual move. His daughter did not attend the wedding, a small ceremony held in her province with roughly 30 guests, a decision he described as one of the more painful, specific details of the entire experience, one he had not fully processed even 3 years later. His son, who lived several states away and had by his own account a somewhat less enmeshed relationship with the day-to-day emotional texture of his father's life, had been more readily accepting, visiting within the first 6 months, and by his father's account, returning from that visit with a noticeably softened perspective that he subsequently attempted, with mixed success, to communicate back to his sister. The specific turning point in his relationship with his daughter arrived roughly 14 months after the wedding, when his first grandchild through his son was born, an event that necessitated a family gathering neither sibling could reasonably avoid without significant additional strain. His daughter attended, met his wife in person for the first time at that gathering, and he described the specific moment things began to genuinely shift as occurring not through any grand reconciliation conversation, but through his wife's quiet and apparently unforced attentiveness to his daughter's own 2 young children during the gathering, an attentiveness his daughter later told him had caught her off guard, having expected, by her own later admission, someone considerably more performative or considerably less genuinely warm than what she actually encountered. He and his daughter now speak regularly, and she has visited the Philippines twice since that gathering, though he was careful to note their relationship required, and continues to require, deliberate ongoing effort rather than having resolved itself automatically into its previous closeness. He said he did not want to suggest a fully tidy resolution where none genuinely existed, and that some residual wariness on her part, he suspected, might simply remain a permanent feature of their relationship going forward, one he had made peace with as an acceptable cost of a decision he did not otherwise regret. When asked what he would tell another widower considering a similar relationship and relocation later in life, his answer focused specifically on the financial transparency he credited as central to the relationship's stability, rather than on the romance itself. He said he had watched, through community forums and second-hand accounts, situations where a lack of early and genuinely honest financial conversation had produced exactly the outcome skeptics assumed was universal, and he believed the difference in his own situation came down almost entirely to a willingness, on both sides, to have specific and sometimes uncomfortable conversations about money expectations, and family obligation well before any legal commitment was made. Rather than assuming affection alone, would resolve those questions adequately if they ever arose. If you are watching this and are considering a relationship that has drawn skepticism from people who love you, based primarily on an age gap, a cultural difference, or an unconventional path to meeting, he wanted to leave you with the specific distinction he felt mattered most from his own experience. The skepticism itself is not necessarily wrong to feel, and he did not fault his daughter for hers, even at its most painful. What matters, he said, is whether you can answer the specific and uncomfortable questions underlying that skepticism honestly and concretely, with actual financial and legal structure, rather than simply reassurance, because the people who love you deserve genuine answers, not just your certainty that their concerns do not apply to your particular situation. Subscribe to Second Life Abroad and turn on the notification bell. Share this with someone you know who is navigating a relationship their family is struggling to understand. Because the path forward is rarely through convincing them faster, but through answering their real questions honestly, one at a time. We will see you in the next one. There is a specific practical dimension of daily life he wanted addressed, because he said the romantic framing most content defaults to tends to skip directly past the genuinely unglamorous adjustment period that followed the wedding itself. He had, by his own honest account, underestimated the difficulty of building a functional daily routine in an unfamiliar country at 68, having assumed, somewhat naively in retrospect, that his wife's presence would make the practical adjustment considerably smoother than it actually proved to be in the first several months. He described a specific difficulty with the local bureaucratic processes required for his long-term visa status, a process that took nearly 4 months longer than initially estimated due to a documentation error on the part of a local processing office, during which he experienced genuine frustration that occasionally, he admitted, found its way into arguments with his wife that had little actually to do with her, and everything to do with his own accumulated stress at navigating an unfamiliar system without the professional competence he had relied on throughout his working life. He wanted this detail included specifically because he felt most stories in this genre present the transition as seamless once the romantic decision itself is made, when in his experience, the romantic decision was, in a specific and important sense, the easier of the two challenges, with the considerably harder work being the accumulated small frustrations of daily logistics in an unfamiliar system. Work that tested the relationship in ways the initial courtship